everybody to the series of webinars organized by COPPEAD. COPPEAD is the business school of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. This series of webinars is available on our YouTube channel. So I will invite you all to go there and browse the material. I am Roberta Campos. I am a professor of marketing and consumer behavior at COPPEAD, and I'm also a researcher at the Center of Studies in Consumption, where we conduct several projects with a cultural and social take on consumption. Today we welcome Professor Dominique Desjeux, Emeritus Professor of University Paris Descartes, Sorbonne. Dominique I will let him make a longer presentation of himself, but I would like just to add some comments. From my point of view, he is a relentless researcher on consumption, a very curious eye that all the time is contrasting experience in several countries throughout his experiences in China, Brazil, France, Europe in general, US, Africa. So we are all the time learning a lot from his crossing boundaries. He is also the creator of the itinerary method that we have often employed in our researchers at COPPEAD as well. And he was very kind to accept our invitations to be here online with us, thinking about this delicate moment that we are all globally going through. And since the beginning of the confinement period, Dominique and I have been exchanging thoughts and impressions on the impacts of this strange experience in our daily household habits. Our focus today will be mainly in the consumption of the household and how the pandemic impacted the domestic experience for all of us. So Dominique, could you, I now pass to you la parole, like we say in French, and I would like you to present a little bit this project that you have been carrying for a while and your main findings. So thank you a lot again to be here.
Thank you very much, Roberta. I hope you hear me very well. And I'm talking from Paris, that is very chic, to Rio. I'm very happy. I like to go to Rio to see Roberta and to see people from Rio. And so we carried out several qualitative studies about daily life, about cosmetics, about something like that. And I've been working for now many, many years about organization, consumption, distribution, innovation, and so on. And now I would like to share with you a very, sometimes I'm not sure of the word in English, but a very fresh study, qualitative study. I finished, it's not finished. I mean, I'm continuing to work on it, but we did the field studies with a colleague from Danone in March and April and May 2020. And so I would like to present something. It's some 13 interviews. And it's about the effect of the confinement on French eating behaviors. And so it is possible to share with you, to compare with your experience, as we did with Roberta. I did with some Chinese colleagues, and so on. So I tried to do something I never done before. That is to share my my screen, and if it works, I don't know.
It works. Yeah, it's perfect.
So
maybe
do you have the PowerPoint?
Yes.
On the left and on the right, a movie or not? Yeah.
Oh, the movie, we see your PowerPoint.
Okay.
And that's all.
So you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. So I try to, it doesn't matter if I don't finish the PowerPoint, it's not a big deal for me, because I try to mix some thought about, some methodological thought and some result. So it's about, during the confinement, There is one now I am at the third one. You see the third one on the screen or not?
Yeah, if you could launch on the presentation mode, maybe it's wider for us to.
It is possible. It is possible. I guess.
Read.
It's possible. Like this. Is it good?
Yeah, but you know, on the bottom of your screen, there is a small button where you can put in presentation mode, and we don't see all the menus. But it worked. It was okay.
If it works, I think it's, well, I see what you mean. Oh, yeah, like this maybe.
Yes, there.
Yeah, that's good. That's better like this. Oh, I put this like this. So the main point is about the, we were confronting, like everywhere in the world, it is the first time I see such a big deal, you know, in all the countries. What is the end of mobility. And what is important with mobility, and I try just to summarize what are the main mobilities, and roughly speaking, I think there are two mobilities. The first is mobility services. It's about, you know, traveling, it's about plane, it's about bicycle and so on. And most interesting in this case, services related to mobility. For instance, catering or automobile insurance, everything around mobility. And the main point for me to be remember during the crisis is that all this mobility was stopped. And so most of the companies involved into mobility were in a bad situation. It is the first slide about, you know, how I organize my information. And I see the society like a huge system of action, you know, from production, distribution, consumption, and environment. And so very often I'm only focusing when I carry out a distribution or consumption, doesn't matter. The main point, and I think that is my main conclusion I gave at the beginning, and so I will not forget it, and maybe you will understand what I want to demonstrate. Thanks to the huge constraint which stop mobility, a larger part of the economy, you can see it in the round, in the yellow round, orange round, can no longer function. And if you look at the blue arrow, you understand what I want to demonstrate. It's not a scoop, but it's very interesting to observe. Now, and I've been looking like this for 3 years, so I have seen how this new way of management of the home was emerging. It has been emerging for 2-3 years, maybe more, I don't know, but maybe 2 or 3 years. Of a domestic, digital, and electric hub. So it means when you look at the home, it's very interesting to understand. It depends on the country. When I go to sub-Saharan Africa, it's not the same. But when I go to China, it's quite the same, and sometimes more digitalized than in France or in the US, or I don't know exactly now in Brazil. The last field study was about 2 or 3 years ago. And so what is important to remember is when you look at a home, it could be seen as a new decision center in order to get what you need for food, for services, and so on. And thanks to the fact there is no mobility, all the digital tools became very central to deal with you. But for me, I worked many years, maybe 15 or 20 years, in schools of agriculture in France and in Africa. And the new home, when I say new, it's never new, but the new home reminds me how what is called paysan society were living. That is, at the same place in the village, in a paysan society, like in Congo, like in Madagascar, where I worked 8 years, at the same place, you can product, you can consume, you can exchange, you can have games, and so on. And it's quite the same, and it's more the same during the confinement. So that is my main conclusion. If you want to understand the main change we have seen, but not for everybody, I guess it's mainly for the upper middle class. Not the upper, not the lower middle class, but the middle class and upper middle class. People who are quite comfortable with digital tools. It could be linked also to life cycles or ages also, of course. The second word maybe which could be useful is what Fine and Leopold, you see on the left of the PowerPoint, called the system of provision. System of provision is very useful, and I applied the same kind of systemic approach to the home. But you see, I see the society as a system, and I see food behavior as also a system of provision. The main point here to remember or to notice is I'm very inductive. That means when I start a field study, I don't make hypotheses because I don't know where I'm going to. And I start, I don't know where I am, I don't know where I am going to. And then step by step, I try to understand what I see, what I observe, and I try to describe. And for me, describing is the way to interpret. There is no difference for me from or between describing and interpreting. It is the same for me. That is why it is called an inductive method. And of course, I'm not saying this method is the best. It is one method, very useful when you don't know anything. It's for the first time I went to Congo, I went to a village. I discovered something very strange, what is called witchcraft. But
Dominique, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but sometimes we lose your voice. If you could just check the connection of your mic.
Yeah, I don't do anything. I know.
Okay, that's okay. It comes and goes, so it works. But just
I know.
Sure.
I see some, but I can't do anything, unfortunately.
That's perfect. We just don't want to lose any words that you're saying. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
I understand. That's why I have a PowerPoint.
Good. So you're talking about witchcraft in Congo when I interrupt you. Sorry.
So now it's a page of advertisement. It's about a book by Dominique Desjeux, which is in English, and it's about the inductive method. And then when I start an observation, it could be at many scales. And in this case, we have choose with Charlotte Sarah, Charlotte, easier to remember, to focus on a micro scale of observation. And I show you two things. When you think in terms of scales of observation, there are two tricky things. The first is not too tricky. The first is, you see on the left, what you see on the scale disappears on a different scale when you go to a different scale. The second point is the individual is not the center of the world. It means we are not the center of the world. It means our ego could be big, but we are wrong if our ego is too big. And I think I had about 50 years before accepting my ego has to be very small if I want to understand the world, you see. And the second point, which is much more tricky, it's about the way by which we can explain everything or a social phenomenon depending on the scale of observation. And if you see in blue, macro-social scale, it's about, you know, social classes, about geopolitics, gender, and so on. Mainly, we work with correlation. If we go at a very micro individual scale, it could be correlation or it could be meaning of life, for instance. If we go further to neurobiological scale or biological scale, it's also about correlation. But between these two scales, mesoscales and microscale, it's about social actors. It's about social interaction. If you think about Goffman is exactly at a micro scale of observation. If you think about Michel Crozier, who is a well-known for people who are expert, of course. When you say well-known, it means it's well-known for expert, not for everybody. In the field of sociology of organization, which is a small field. Anyway, at this scale, when you want to explain something, and that is the scale on which I have been focused on in March, May, and April, it is the situation which is the way to explain something. That is why it is impossible to explain from the macro scale, then mesoscale, then micro-social scale, then micro-individual scale. It's impossible. So I accept also that when I observe a social phenomenon, and I'm not able to have a global approach of this phenomenon. It's also a way to deal with our ego. We are not the center and there is no global. In our mind, there is a global approach, but we are wrong to think that. But it is useful. It's only that. And so, if you look here, we are now at a micro-social scale. That is at this scale I use the itinerary method, and I show you here. I guess you know very well now the itinerary method. The main point when I talk about the itinerary method is that when I start a new itinerary, I don't know how many steps we will have. I don't know how many itineraries we will have when we will observe these practices. The main point for me is that behind the itinerary method, there is a theory, which is a theory of decision, which is at this scale, it is not an individual decision, it's a collective decision, and it's not a decision at one moment, it's a process of decision making that is behind the itinerary method. So you understand also, thanks to the scale of observation, I have not to say that people who are focusing on individual and trade-off are stupid. I only have to say, they are not at the same scale that mine. That's enough. And if they work at a very macro scale, and sometimes I go to a macro scale of observation, I don't mind too. I can say, at this scale, you see something different from my scale, and so on. So it's very useful to discuss between disciplinary. The main gathering technique is about observation. I like this photo. I have a lot of photos of fridge because this one was taken during the field study. We were on internet. The people, the individual took her computer. She went in front of the fridge and she took the
first. Lost you there.
Oui, I know. I see. Passer au parleur. Votre micro par défaut est passé le microphone. Bon,
now we hear you. Now we can hear you.
It works. It works. Bon, j'espère.
Yes.
Bon.
Good.
I guess it's internet issue. So now I know it is possible to make ethnographic observation by internet. I did that once by telephone. It was very interesting, but now it is possible to do that. And I know a good friend of mine whose name is Patty Sunderland, who has been that for maybe 5 or 10 years. And once she shown me, you know, how she dealt with that. She dealt with that. So this photo is very interesting too, because you can see all the stuff we need during the confinement. And this is a family fridge. It's not, for instance, it's not a young man fridge. It's very, very different. That's a sample, which means our CSP was about B and C class, not upper class, not lower class. It's quite good. And we had to ask to Danone people, because we only had 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you know, to carry out the field study. And it was very quick to get people. So the main point is, if I want to generalize the result, I'm only able to do that with people of the same kind of company or social class. Very often I am asked about bias, and I'm used to say, life is a big bias. And I think the main object of anthropology is to work and to observe bias. And there is no knowledge without bias. We are not in experimental science. We are in life, and life, we don't control anything. Here, I give you a quite interesting anthropological point of view. And I read 2 or 3 papers with the same interpretation than mine. It's about liminarity or liminality, the same in English or in French. It's about how French people were marginalized during 2 months. And maybe you have the same experience in Brazil. And it means that the first step is about, I think it's there, here. The first step is the step of separation. It was very funny because some people explained to us that the last night before the confinement, they go to bars, another getting a wax, you know, another I don't know exactly why, you know. So it was very interesting to discover all these practices before being marginalized. And then at the beginning of this marginalization, there is one who stopped eating meat. She stopped eating sweet, exactly like during Lent. I was not sure of this word, carême in French, you know, when you enter into a very special religious period. And it's like, you know, being a monk or something like that. But after 1 or 2 weeks, it was finished. And then now it's the aggregation time. What means, you know, people are going to the hairdresser, to a restaurant, to a bar, going to work. Some people don't want to go to work. It's very funny and interesting, you know. And some big companies are very stressed because they don't know how to get back your workers, you know, their workers, their managers, and so on. Here it's about, you know, how the confinement concentrates the function of, in the home, of production, consumption, and action in the new digital and electric home hub. That's, I think it's a new concept. I don't mind too much about concept. It is called what I call a descriptive concept. I try to gathering in in 5 words here, what is the main idea I found in my observation. The second stage, after, you know, the separation and being marginalized, is preparing shopping, scheduling meals, and so on. At this stage, the main point is just a comparison I made between a lot of field studies we carried out between 1990 and 2000 with Isabelle Garabio and many people. And at this time, when I look at all these field studies, there is no digital tools. Nowadays, they are omnipresent. If you look at the short list, Instagram, Amazon, Alexa, mobile phone, internet for recipes, contactless payment card, Tricount. I don't know if you know Tricount. It's a beautiful application in order to deal with several people when they have to share, the payment of something. I'm sure there are more than this list, but it's impressive to understand how important it is. And why it is important to understand, we know that. It is called in anthropology an invisible evidence. Everybody knows that. But we have to take care of this observation. Because my main conclusion is not about the importance of digitalization, but the importance of electricity. My main conclusion is, if there is a breakdown of 1 week in Paris, for instance, I don't know how we will survive. Everything in daily life is based on electric energy. Or that is a big discrepancy, because most of the causes of the heating climate comes from energy, from fossil energy. So the main priority is not to change the consumption, is not to change the production. I'm not sure about that. Maybe it is, but I'm not sure. The main priority is to change the nature of electricity, shift from fossil energy to alternative energy. And you understand why the home is so important. Because I think one center of decision which could impact the shift could be in the home. I don't know exactly how, but I'm sure there is a link. Another point is about food, about food behavior. It's not only an individual explanation, it's also a collective practice. And Roberta, I think, know quite well Daniel Miller. And here there is something about, we know quite well also, but I discovered more clearly that when you talk about food behavior, there are always two steps. One about, useful food, and one about, award food. Because we need to compensate some effort or something, everything. And so during the confinement, we saw these two movements about behavior, and it's quite the same that treats, which is a word from by Daniel Miller in this beautiful book, Theory of Shopping, even if the English of this book is not quite easy to understand, but it's a beautiful book of observation in daily life. There's also a chapter I talk about. If you want, after you can have my PowerPoint, of course, so you can have all the lecture. And after you have another chapter, which is make love in supermarket. What means buying in a supermarket, it's not only individual, it's not only a question of motivation, it's not only a question of brand, it's also a collective practice. You think about your family, your friends, and so on. That's another scale, that's why. This one is the most interesting discovery of our field study, is a true skill under constraint. The main constraint is, there are two constraints. Due to the fact there is no more mobility, you are only allowed to go 1 or 2 times shopping. So you have to think much more about your shopping, what you have to buy, because you have no chance. If you miss something, you have to wait maybe 3, 4, maybe 1 week sometimes before going back shopping. That's the first constraint. And the second one, which is close to Brazil, thanks to the fact there is no mobility, there is no more what is called human energy. That is grandparents, nanny, school, and so on. Why school? because I discovered, thanks to the field study, that lunch was mainly at school or at big company or at restaurant. And so the mother, because it's mainly the mother who is in charge of cooking, had only one lunch, one meal to prepare every day. And also, it means school was a kind of help for her, because, you know, she has not to think about this meal at the lunchtime. But now she has to think about all this stuff. And so the main strategy you find on this PowerPoint is how to manage between fast and slow rotation. Fast rotation is, for instance, when you talk about yogurt, about milk, about, you know, about butter, if you use butter, all these products you have to buy every week. And slow rotation is more, you know, about maybe oil, vinegar, you only have to buy every month or every 3 months. It depends on the cooking, it depends on the culture. But also, you have to deal with short and long conservation. So it's a nice pattern. It's a nice strategic pattern to understand there is a skill inside the home, which is a skill about how to manage the stock of food and how to manage, thanks to many objects, mainly fridge, a cupboard, a freezer, big freezer, and the garden. I discovered that the garden, when there are vegetables, is also a kind of stocking place. Very interesting. Maybe you will find some equivalent in Brazil too. Why the garden is a kind of stocking place? It's because you have your tomatoes, you have your beans, you have your, I don't know, many things, and they are kept in the earth. And so it's a kind of fridge. And every day you can go and you take your tomatoes or your beans and so on. I also discovered something I have seen before, that it was very strong there, is that thanks to these objects. So I try to say something, the home skill of women, mainly women, is about stocking. We don't talk a lot about how to stock. We talk about cooking, we talk about meal. But in this case, stocking was very important thanks to the fact that there is no mobility. And it's a true skill. And this skill is possible. I'm trying to summarize all my PowerPoint here. This skill is possible because you have a system of objects, fridge, freezer, and so on. Electricity or electric, I forget the word in English, you know, it's about, you know, all the electric stuff you need to cook. Huh? Appliances.
Appliances, yes.
Appliances, and so on. And also, you understand, thanks to the long conservation, it's not only about conserve, I forget the word conserve. Boîte de conserve. Bon.
Yes, I forgot. Cans, yeah. Or cans, conserved food, canned food.
Maybe
canned food.
Maybe can. But there is also freezer. And so you understand when you look at the fridge, how women are dealing with the fridge and the freezer in order to eat what has a short conservation time, and how to deal with long conservation depending on the situation, depending on lunch or depending on dinner and so on. And so the cold is very important. And that reminds me a field study we did with Roberta. We went to a supermarket in Rio, and the owner or the manager of the supermarket explained to her that the supermarket was the fridge of the consumers. because electricity is very expensive. And so instead of having a fridge, or instead of using the fridge, I don't know, they were used to go to the supermarket and buy freeze food. And here it is inside the home. I can stop here. Here is a photo of what is at stake with the system of stockage, or stock, the system of conservation of food is exactly the optimization of conservation in order to minimize losses. We know in France, maybe 20% of food which have been bought are wasted. So if we understand how to improve the system of stock of food, maybe we will find a solution in order to minimize losses. Here, it's about food, so it is something very important in France. It is a kind of religion. And so everybody, every woman, when they were answering the interview, were saying, oh, I'm not very good in cooking. It means, if you want, it's humor and it's not my opinion. If you want to be a real woman, you need to be a very good cook. If you don't know how to cook, you are not a real woman. I'm talking from the point of view of men who are from the 19th century, but they are still living in France. And so it's funny, but it's not. It's important to understand anyway how cooking identity is building the identity of French women and men. And one element is very interesting is do it yourself. It's much more important than buy it yourself. Buy it yourself, I think it's not the right translation. Do it yourself is more important than to buy. It's not to buy, it is, I forget the word. I made a mistake, I'm sorry.
But it's we understand the point. That's
the main point, if you understand.
Yes, yes.
The main point. Ça va passer tout ça, the identity. And the fifth stage is about the meal. I think the main result for me, there are many results, and all my results are in French on my site. The main result, if we want to think about the meal, we have to think in terms of system of meals, because many parents are balancing meal from the school, meal from the company, meal from the restaurant, and meals at home. And it's very interesting to understand how they think about one meal they are preparing or they are cooking, thinking, for instance, today, I have one example. It is Arabic people. She told us in another field study, doesn't matter. She told me, my son eat halal, and so he can't eat at the canteen of the school. And so at night, I cook meat for him. So you see, she thinks about, meals as a system and not only as a moment in the home. That's the main, for me, new thing I discovered. That I call, that's another thing, very funny thing. What is a balanced diet? We have three answers. Look at, one is about fresh and diversified product with fresh vegetables and so on. Another one's a balanced diet is when there is, it doesn't look really like, there is a problem here, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, I know.
We can hear you. We can hear you well now.
Wow. Voilà, c'est bon. And then after the dishwasher is not very visible. It doesn't look very important. But I discovered that the dishwasher was the analyzer of the good or bad cooperation inside the family. It means if the woman takes in charge children, if there are children, and the cooking, the man or the other people have to take in charge the dishwasher, the tables, and so on. And I also show that the balance of what is called the sexual division of tasks in the home is well balanced if the man, for instance, deal with do-it-yourself, the garden, administration of the home, and so on. So it is more subtle than to say most of the activity are managed by the woman. You have to look at the whole activities of the home. So, like, the conclusion is, during the confinement, digitalization has developed in most compartments of the domestic activity. Game, sometimes I had to translate very quickly, but so we understand, you know, thanks to the digitalization, and sometimes there's another word, it doesn't matter, working with telework, shopping with e-commerce, e-aperitif to keep in touch with family and friends, and also leisure. It was very important. The number of games increased a lot at the end of March, at the beginning of April, and because I look at the numbers, of course. Voilà, ma conclusion est there. My main conclusion, I mean the main broad conclusion, many conclusions, is about the energy issue. I talk about it at the beginning, and it is to say, at the end, if a power breakdown occurs and lasts several days, the anti-consumption system is called into question. And all this with energy that has no greenhouse gas effect. We have to change everything with energy that has no greenhouse gas effect. Thank you very much. And now I'm open to any question if I understand the question.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dominique. The audience is asking if you can share the slides, and you already said it was okay. So for everybody that had, everybody subscribed, so we will send to your emails. There one question regarding doing qualitative research during confinement and through the internet digitally, and how trustworthy are the data obtained from the internet interview, and if you could suggest mechanisms on how to do it from a qualitative lens. So how can we solve how can we do qualitative research and get this interpretive eye being so far away from reality? I think this maybe the question is about that.
It's a question for me?
Yes. Well, I can also share some of the things that I'm doing, but I think everybody's interested about what you have been doing since you were presenting the research, and with very interesting results.
Right. So I had some problem with the sound, so I'm not sure to understand. If you can repeat the question.
Okay, so the question is how to face the challenge of doing qualitative research during a confinement.
Yeah. It was a big challenge for me. For me, I would say the main ability to anthropologists is to be able to do something where they don't know anything. You know, about 100 years ago, Bronisław Malinowski, who was the first, I mean, one of the main first anthropologists, was in Papouasie now, and the First World War began. And he was blocked in this big island. And so he decided to carry out a field study where he was stopped and unable to go anywhere. And he discovered what is called the kula. The kula is a beautiful description of a give and take, you know, between population. I had the same. I'm not Malinowski. I'm not as good as Malinowski, but I had the same. I was in the same situation when I was in Congo, when I was in China. I don't know anything. I don't speak. Now I speak Chinese a little, but and I was in the same situation with the COVID-19. I saw a lot of people doing quantitative study. They are very good. We have a lot of figures, but only a few qualitative studies, because it's much more difficult if you are not used to create, invent, you know, in front of a situation. So we decided to invent. Invent means, in this case, using internet, recruiting only people from Danone, what normally is not the right rule. You know, you have to recruit people from a lot of diversity. And so it was impossible. And if you look at what I have found, you know, I think some of the results could be adapted to many French, not all Frenches, that's sure. But it is possible to say these results about the fridge, about the freezer, about, you know, stocking, about cooking, about shopping and so on could be adapted to many situations. The main point is, I'm not sure that big companies are very interested in qualitative research. If that is the point, for me, that is the main point. They are interested in some result. And when I say it's very realistic, when I say they are not very interested, it means they don't want to pay for such a field study. If they don't pay, it means for me, they are not very interested. It's not a critic. It's only, I understand when you are very stressed, you don't know how to deal with such a qualitative research. For me, it's very concrete, but for a big company or a small company, it's not concrete. It's very abstract for them. That is the indicator how far from the consumers all these big companies are.
Okay, so we have some more questions for you. Can you hear me well?
I see a question here.
Okay.
From
so
Richard.
Yeah, there is. If you click on Q&A, but I can read them for you if it's easier.
No, there is no problem, Richard. He said, for me, self-ethnography is something new. And it's new for me too. It is the first time I do, that's why I had to invent a word for that. Because I was unable to go inside the home of all these people. And I was sure that it's okay. My problem was confidentiality. I didn't want to show my mother-in-law and my wife. And so the main method was to mainly shoot hands, you know, and practices and voice. And I learned a lot of things because, you know, when you work with a qualitative method, everything is good. We are not in an experimental research where you have to control everything. In a qualitative research, you don't control anything. So everything is good because you don't control. So self-ethnography is useful because after I have been able to cross with a qualitative research based on 13 interviews and also cross with figures survey. I have some figures very interesting about, you know, for instance, now we can say about 20% of French were very struck by the confinement. Only 20%. It's quite a lot, but only 20%, not 50%. Also, it was possible to say the cell of bottle of water has decreased during the confinement. And the tap water was more popular than mineral water and so on. Or the yoga mats increase a lot. And we understand why, thanks to the qualitative research, we can cross, because many people became doing sport during the confinement. And so they had to buy yoga mats. Also, they use internet to have, a lecture or to have courses. I'm not sure of the word, lecture about yoga, about sport, and so on. And I saw several times my wife, discussing with her niece, and she was looking at some sports, something. That was the question.
Another question that we have on the Q&A as well, not only on the chat. There are some questions around the concept of indulgence, the treat that you were mentioning. That's a part of consumption is about indulgence in times of constraint. So do you believe this type of behavior will continue after pandemic? What should we expect to stick in consumer behavior after the pandemic?
I think it's a very interesting question. There are two meanings of indulgence or treat. The main meaning is from marketing, and it's about individual. It's about pleasure. It's not my meaning. And I'm not saying it's a bad meaning. It's not my point. It's more something about, it's a collective meaning for me. When I mean collective, it's not only individual. And I think that if we think about daily life outside the confinement, we have the same game, the same play between indulgence or award, about food, and utility, or not utility, that's a false friend, but about,
yes, functionality.
Exactly. It's a balance, a perpetual balance between, functionality and meaning, or functionality and indulgence. And the treat is very interesting because I have one good example. Once I was, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I was following a guy who was under constraint of pouvoir d'achat, buying power. And so he only had an amount of money, and I was looking how he was buying things. Everything was bought with the lowest price. But once he spent a lot of money, and it was about his dog. It was very expensive. And that is exactly the balance. You see what I mean? Between functionality and pleasure, or I don't know, what meaning, or what is important for you. And answer to the question, that is why I think it's not indulgence which will continue, but the balance, the balance game between functionality and indulgence. It is together.
Dominique, if I can complement this
thought.
Of course. I think normally in marketing, we are very influenced by the pyramid of Maslow, the idea that the needs follow a certain hierarchy, and that normally will only fulfill indulgence when we have met more functional needs. And I think the example of Daniel Miller and your own, all the ones that you just mentioned, show that it's not the order, it doesn't follow the order.
No.
People actually use both to signal that they are being wise in the consumption in general, and for a small part, they allow themselves to have a treat, so that doing this treat for a small amount show that they are being wise on all the rest. So it's a different system. It's not a system in terms of order, but a system in terms of contrast. And I think that's what Daniel Miller is trying to debate in the theory of shopping, and that you are presenting now. I
think it's a very interesting critics of Maslow pyramid.
Yes.
You know, Maslow pyramid is very interesting, but
Yes.
it's a very old pyramid, about 60 or 70 years now.
Yes.
It
Yes.
would be nice. But if we change of scale of observation, we don't observe the same thing. So when we don't observe the same thing, it's not to say the pyramid is stupid. It's only to say if you look from another angle, you will learn something more interesting or something
Yes.
different, which could be more interesting. And here, I think it's a very good point to say the balance between functionality and meaning and so on.
Yes. We are reaching the end of our, unfortunately, we are reaching the end of your webinar. I would just like to invite you to make a final comment on a perspective view. How do you see the future? Normally we have this closing question. So if you can.
I will show you. If I
can you hear me?
No, very well. The only point I try to just here, I guess I have one point here, very funny for me. Look, you can see, voila, the end. You can see the PowerPoint. If you look at the wave, that is the end of the future. I think the future for me. The future is not linear. It's like a wave. There is a very funny word in English, Seaton wave, which comes from an engineer in Scotland, or a Scottish engineer who was looking at the wave on the canal or something, on a river, something like that. And that is, I'm not sure, of course, the future will be like a wave, but it could be possible. And so for me, the most interesting thing is now we have to think in terms of crisis. And you know, maybe in 1 month or 3 weeks, we don't know, in France, we will have to be confined back, you know. I plan to go to holidays at mid-July. Maybe I will not be allowed to go to holidays, you know. You know, in Brazil, you know, in China, you know, everywhere. So now we have to think in terms of confinement and outside, and so on. So it's very, very different. Because crisis, if you look at my PowerPoint, you will see crisis for pandemic, pollution, war, food shortage, global warming, and so on and so on. So that's why uncertain, non-linear, repetitive future. And we have to be very adaptive, what is quite difficult.
What you mean is that we won't be reaching a normal. We will have normals, in plural, meaning that several waves of different lives that will be created.
Exactly. That is life, but I think it is accelerating.
Yes.
Voilà. You know, Roberta, if there are people who want to share some question after by email, it is possible. You know that.
Okay, we can type your email on the chat, or maybe your website. I think it's interesting to diffuse for people if you want to write on the chat. And for all the participants, we will email the link from YouTube as well, so you will be able to see or check any detail that you might need, and the PowerPoint as well. So I would like to thank very much Professor Dominique Desjeux on behalf of COPPEAD and myself. It was really a true pleasure to exchange ideas. It felt like Rio was right next to Paris.
Yeah.
So, and Dominique has been posting regularly on LinkedIn with a lot of scoops and very interesting insights. So I invite you all to visit his LinkedIn profile. And I thank the public that participated today and contributed to our debate with such rich contribution. It was a great pleasure. Well, thank you all for coming. Dominique, thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberta. And I hope we do it again. It's wonderful. With more questions, maybe.
Yes,
more
with more
discussion,
time.
more discussion, right? To share more.
Next time we will do a longer one.
That's nice.
Like a real session.
Yeah.
And in the chat, you're gonna see you have people from all over the world.
Yeah, that's good.
Nice. So thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a nice end of week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.